Welcome back to AV Veterans Talk. We're continuing our conversation with this week's guest, Christine Yandek. Hey, we're back here with Christine. We're talking about the your lead up for the military and your training when you went from telecommunications or comm, whatever your Air Force, AFSC, I think we called it the Air Force, but you went to a medic stuff. So did you go to a school? And where was that school at?
I did. I went to the Combat Medic Training Center at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, which is where all of the medics go. I just went through the course as someone who's what's called prior service.
Right.
Because I had already been through another military occupational school before that.
Yeah. So the desire for, where did that come from to become a medic?
It's interesting that you ask about that because during the early years of my military career, my mom was actually diagnosed with liver cancer, and it was determined almost right away that she was terminal. I was actually stationed in Hawaii at the time, and so I was able to apply for a reassignment, and the closest duty assignment that they could give me stateside was in Fort Meade, Maryland, so I was transferred to Fort Meade. But they had informed my company commander that before I even came to the unit that you know my personal situation was what it was. Yeah. And so I was able to take passes almost every weekend. My commander allowed that to happen, and so I would drive home and drive the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
Oh wow! All the way to Ohio? Wow, that's a long drive.
So I logged a lot of miles back and forth.
Yeah.
But she survived for almost a year, which was almost twice as long as they gave her. They gave her 6 months from the point that she was diagnosed. And so I was able to travel back and forth almost every weekend, and I started taking care of her when the visiting nurse wasn't there. Yeah. And my mom was a nurse, and after listening to all of her stories, that was actually the last thing I thought I'd ever want to do. But as it turns out, not only was it something that you know, became a desire for me, but it was something that I was good at. So. Yeah,
well, and that's, boy, you know, stuff, how we come to our skills is amazing and stuff, and the backstory there and stuff, and, you know, your mom inspiring that through her suffering, you know, and stuff, and you to take care as a daughter, you know, stuff speaks about who you are as a person, which, you know, other things in your life and stuff, I've come to understand why you are the special person that you are.
Well, you have to look for the positive in anything, and I after my life of experiences, I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a purpose.
Absolutely.
And I think the purpose was of that happening was to put me on the right path, the path that I was supposed to be on in life. So
yeah. So you went through your training, and you know, and little did you know that with the Gulf Wars that were coming, that you would be thrown into that mix in a very brutal environment, and you would be tested probably many times, more times than you and I have talked about. And your first deployment over there and dealing with it, getting up to speed, I guess you would say, in combat. Of course, you know, they try to do their best in training and stuff to get you ready for stuff like that. How did you adapt to that right out of the gate, you know, when you got over there? I mean, was it that shock or stuff, or were you just, of course, you were the ultimate professional and stuff like, oh, you probably didn't even bat an eye and stuff, and you just got in there and you did it, you know, and stuff, and right?
I like to think that that's the way that it happened.
Yeah, but it maybe not. Yeah.
No, so. You know, there's, every day is different. Some days you feel like when the day is over, like you've accomplished something, you've done good, you've used your training, you did everything the way it was supposed to, and then some days you just get something thrown at you that you never expected. Yeah. I actually had sort of a leg up in terms of preparedness, because before I even went on my first deployment to Iraq, I was at Walter Reed, and I was taking care of the first casualties that were coming back from Afghanistan and then from Iraq.
Yeah.
And, you know, in addition to giving care to those folks, we listened to their stories.
Yeah.
The stories of how they got wounded and what happened to them and what they were seeing and experiencing on the ground over there. And that was because we knew that we would eventually be there ourselves.
Yeah.
And that all of that, you know, experience was a learning tool for us to help keep everyone alive when it was our turn to go.
Yeah. And, you know, there's always the mundane with the sheer terror aspect where you're having to irrigate some guy's stub toe or something like that, stuff like that.
Oh, I have a couple stories.
Yeah, you do stuff. Well, comedy's always good in these aspects if it's comedy and stuff, you know. But I mean, share if you want.
We had a Marine who came to the battalion aid station and then to the combat support hospital who went to close his pocket knife on himself. And realized after he did that he wasn't wearing his flak vest any longer, and he ended up stabbing himself in the abdomen.
Yeah.
And it was a deep enough wound that he actually nicked his own liver. So we had to send him to the combat support hospital to actually have his liver surgically removed.
Oh, man. So, well, you know what? These are just young men, you know, that, we can all be knuckleheads when we have to be, I guess you would say. So that's, you know, once again, there was probably a lot more than that, than the absolutely, you know, the brutal stuff that you had to deal with over there. We had Jason Watts here. We interviewed him. You know, Jason, he was Army and Purple Heart, and he was in a convoy, and, you know, he ran over a improvised device, and he shattered both of his legs and things like that. And those guys come into your, you know, they usually fly them into you, correct? Is that the way that works? And
they're triaged and treated on the scene by the medics that are in the immediate area.
Yeah.
And every convoy had medics that traveled with them. So, and then they call in what's called a 9-line medevac.
Right.
And then if there's no immediate threat to air support coming in and landing to pick up those casualties, then the casualties would be picked up and transported by air to whichever. We had several combat support hospitals in the Iraqi theater, so whichever one was the closest.
Right. I think we'll take a break here. We'll come back. We'll talk about one of those, because you actually rode with some of those teams, correct? I thought. I'll have you explain the story of the response to one of the situations you shared with us on Veterans Day this last year and stuff. We'll talk about that. So that story needs to stand by itself there. So we'll be right back here with Christine. I'm Bob Alvis, and thanks for joining us for this segment of AV Veterans Talk.